and the others halted, paralyzed by the sight. The realization hit them all at once. This was not just a path to Europe, but a path of death. The bones before them were the remnants of those who had come before, travelers like them who had embarked on the same perilous journey, only to meet their end in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the desert. The sun dipped low over the hills of Goaso, casting long shadows over the cocoa trees that stood like sentinels guarding the land. For years, Amoah had worked this soil, coaxing life from the earth, his hands calloused but his spirit proud. Yet tonight, as he gazed across the fields, the land that had been his sanctuary felt more like a prison. The stories his friend Kofi had told him of Europe, of wealth, comfort, and the easy life, burned in his mind like a fever. Kofi, who had once been a struggling farmer like him, had returned from Italy transformed. No longer the man who had left Goaso in desperation, he was now a symbol of success, dressed in fine clothes and speaking of a life beyond the wildest dreams of their village. Kofi's tales of Europe glittered with promise, and for Amoah, the farm he had once cherished now seemed small, insignificant, in comparison to what lay beyond the Sahara. Ignoring the warnings of his wife and the elders who spoke of the dangers, Amoah sold his farm, his house, and even his father's ancestral land. With the money from these sales, he set out on a journey that he believed would lead him to a life of wealth and prosperity. As he walked away from Goaso, his heart was heavy, yet filled with hope. Little did he know that the road ahead would be paved with trials that would test the very core of his being. Amoah's journey began in Tamale, where he joined a group of travelers bound for Europe. The smugglers who had promised them safe passage were men of few words, their faces hardened by years of trafficking desperate souls across unforgiving terrain. They packed Amoah and the others into a rickety bus that rattled its way through the Sahel, leaving behind the green hills of Ghana and entering the desolate plains of Burkina Faso. As the bus roared northward, the landscape changed, the lush vegetation giving way to dry, cracked earth and endless expanses of sand. The first true challenge came in Niger, at the edge of the Sahara. The bus could go no further, and the group was transferred into pickup trucks, crammed so tightly that they could barely move. The sun was a blazing furnace overhead, and the heat was suffocating. For days, they traveled across the desert, the trucks skidding over sand dunes and rocky outcrops. The journey was grueling. The sun scorched them by day, and the cold of the desert nights cut to the bone. Water was rationed carefully, each drop precious, and the food they had was barely enough to sustain them. In the heart of the Sahara, a sandstorm hit. The wind howled, whipping the sand into a frenzy, blinding and choking those caught in its path. Amoah felt the sting of sand against his skin, like thousands of tiny needles piercing his flesh. The storm raged for hours, and when it finally subsided, they found that 2 of their group had vanished, swallowed by the desert without a trace. Their absence was a grim reminder that this journey was not just a test of endurance, but a fight for survival. As the days turned into weeks, the convoy passed through a series of desert towns, Dirku, Madama, and finally, Kafran. Each town was a place of desolation, where the heat was oppressive and the air was thick with dust. In Dirku, the travelers encountered a group of migrants who had been stranded for months, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They warned of bandits and militias ahead, but turning back was not an option. In Kafran, the convoy was ambushed by armed men, Tuareg rebels, who fired their guns into the air, their faces covered by scarves, their eyes cold and merciless. The smugglers handed over what money they had left, but it wasn't enough. The rebels took what they wanted, including 2 young women from the group, and left them to continue their journey, now even more vulnerable. As the convoy pressed deeper into the Sahara, the landscape grew increasingly unforgiving. One afternoon, while they took a brief rest under the sparse shade of a rocky outcrop, a sense of unease settled over the group. The sun was high, and the air shimmered with heat, making the horizon dance. Amoah, weary from the relentless journey, sat down on the ground, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Suddenly, a hiss broke the silence, a sound so menacing it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Before he could react, a snake lunged at him, its scales glistening in the sunlight. It was an echise, known locally as the carpet viper, one of the most venomous snakes in the Sahara. Its fangs sank into Amoah's ankle, the pain immediate and excruciating. Panic erupted among the travelers as they scrambled away from the snake, which slithered back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Amoah's vision blurred as the venom began to course through his veins, a burning sensation spreading from the bite. He could feel his legs swelling, the pain so intense it felt as though his flesh were on fire. The smugglers acted quickly. They knew that in the desert, even a small delay could mean death. They loaded Amoah into the back of a truck and sped towards the nearest town, the vehicle bouncing over the rough terrain. Each jolt sent fresh waves of agony through Amoah's body, his consciousness slipping away as the venom took hold. Hours later, they arrived at a small settlement, little more than a cluster of mud brick huts. The locals, accustomed to the dangers of the desert, directed them to a herbalist, a wizened old man with deep lines etched into his face, a lifetime of knowledge in his eyes. The herbalist examined Amoah with calm efficiency, his hands steady as he prepared a poultice from a mixture of herbs and powders. Time seemed to stand still as the herbalist applied the poultice to the wound, chanting softly under his breath. Amoah was fading fast, the world around him a blur of sound and color. But the herbalist worked tirelessly, drawing out the poison with ancient remedies passed down through generations. By the time night fell, the swelling in Amoah's leg had begun to subside. The pain, once unbearable, had dulled to a throbbing ache. The herbalist stayed by his side throughout the night, tending to him with care, ensuring that the venom was fully expelled from his system. It was a slow recovery, but by morning, Amoah could move his leg again. The danger passed. The desert had taken him to the brink of death, but he had survived, though barely. The convoy resumed its journey the next day, with Amoah still weak but determined to press on. The Sahara, however, had not finished with him yet. Several days later, they arrived in a small desert town known as Mirza, a place as harsh and unforgiving as the surrounding landscape. The town was a necessary stop, a place to replenish supplies and rest before the next leg of their journey. But the respite was short-lived. That evening, as Amoah lay on the floor of a makeshift shelter, he felt a sharp sting on his hand. He recoiled instinctively, but the damage was already done. In the dim light, he saw the culprit, a fat-tailed scorpion, its venom potent enough to kill a man if left untreated. Amoah's heart raced as the venom spread through his body, his hand already beginning to swell. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced, sharp, searing, and relentless. He could feel it pulsing through his veins, each throb of his heart pushing the venom further along. Within hours, the effects of the sting became severe. Amoah's breathing grew labored, his vision blurred, and his muscles began to twitch uncontrollably. He felt feverish, his body drenched in sweat, and soon he was racked with convulsions. The people around him watched helplessly, knowing that, in the middle of the desert, medical help was scarce and time was running out. Once again, the herbalist was called upon, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the panic around him. He treated Amoah with a mixture of herbal extracts and cooling compresses, doing everything he could to counteract the effects of the venom. The night was long and filled with tension, as Amoah's life hung in the balance. By dawn, the fever began to break. Amoah's breathing eased, and the convulsions subsided, though he was left weak and exhausted. The scorpion's sting had nearly taken his life, but through sheer will and the herbalist's knowledge, he had once again survived. However, these brushes with death left a deep mark on Amoah, further eroding the hope that had once driven him on this journey. As they continued their trek through the vastness of the Sahara, the group encountered a sight that would haunt Amoah forever. One day, as the convoy trudged through a particularly desolate stretch of desert, the landscape began to change. The sand, once golden and warm, became gray and lifeless. The air grew still, and an eerie silence fell over the group. Ahead, scattered across the dunes like the remnants of a forgotten battle, were countless human skeletons. The sun-bleached bones stood stark against the barren sands, a grim testament to the unforgiving nature of the Sahara. Some skeletons were still partially clothed in tattered rags, others lay bare, their bones picked clean by the desert scavengers. Skulls grinned up at the sky, their empty eye sockets reflecting the endless blue, while bony fingers clawed futilely at their earth, frozen in their final moments of desperation. Amoah, paralyzed by the sight. The realization hit them all at once. This was not just a path to Europe, but a path of death. The bones before them were the remnants of those who had come before, travelers like them who had embarked on the same perilous journey, only to meet their end in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the desert. The silence was oppressive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the group took in the horror before them. Some of the travelers whispered prayers under their breath. Others simply stood, staring in mute terror at the sea of bones stretching out before them. Amoah felt a cold dread settle over him, colder than any desert night. These were people who had once been full of hope, dreams of a better life driving them forward. Now they were nothing but skeletons, their dreams crushed under the weight of the Sahara's indifference. The convoy moved on, but the mood had changed. Every step forward was taken with the awareness that they could easily join the ranks of those whose remains littered the sands. The sight of the skeletons haunted Amoah. He couldn't shake the image from his mind, the lifeless eyes, the skeletal hands reaching out, as if in a final plea for help that never came. The desert had claimed them, and it could just as easily claim him. As night fell, the group made camp at a small oasis, the first they had seen in days. The water, though brackish, was a blessing, and they drank deeply, trying to wash away the horrors of the day. But for Amoah, the water did little to calm his nerves. He lay awake, staring up at the stars, which seemed colder and more distant than ever. Every time he closed his eyes, the skeletons appeared, their silent screams echoing in his mind. The hell of Sabah. The journey through Niger ended in Sabah, the gateway to Libya. If the desert had been a trial, Sabah was hell. The city was a chaotic sprawl of crumbling buildings and streets patrolled by armed militias. Here, the smugglers' true colors were revealed. They herded the group into a warehouse, a squalid, overcrowded place where hundreds of other migrants were already crammed together like cattle. The air inside was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, and the pervasive odor of fear. Amoah was forced to sleep sitting up, his back against the cold concrete wall. There was no room to lie down, no privacy, and no escape from the squalor. The smugglers demanded more money, far more than they had originally agreed upon. Those who couldn't pay were dragged out, beaten, and then taken away. Amoah saw the smugglers take women and young girls, their cries echoing in the warehouse as they were led away to an uncertain fate. For days, Amoah and the others were held captive in the warehouse. The food they were given was barely edible, a thin gruel that did little to ease their hunger. Water was scarce, and they had to fight for every drop. Disease spread quickly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions, and without access to medical care, many of the migrants began to fall ill. Amoah watched as men and women he had traveled with succumbed to fever, their bodies growing weaker with each passing day. At night, the warehouse was filled with the sounds of weeping and whispered prayers. Amoah tried to sleep, but his mind was plagued with nightmares. He dreamed of the desert, of the sandstorm that had nearly taken his life, of the bodies left behind, buried in the dunes. But worse than the dreams were the waking hours, the endless waiting, the uncertainty of what would happen next. One night, as they huddled together for warmth, a group of armed men stormed the warehouse. They wore the uniforms of a militia, but acted with the cruelty of bandits. They demanded more money from the smugglers, who had nothing left to give. In a show of power, the militia dragged several men out of the warehouse and hit them in front of the others. The crack of gunfire echoed through the night, a stark reminder that their lives were worth nothing here. After the encounter, the remaining migrants were forced into trucks and driven to another holding area on the outskirts of the city. This place was even worse than the warehouse. It was an open-air prison, a barren lot surrounded by barbed wire, where they were left to rot under the scorching sun. There was no shelter, no food, and no water. The smugglers had abandoned them, leaving them at the mercy of the elements and the armed men who guarded them. Amoah's strength began to fail him. His skin was cracked and bleeding from the relentless sun, his lips dry and blistered. He was weak from hunger and dehydration, his body little more than a skeleton covered in skin. The will to survive, which had carried him across the Sahara, was now fading. Every breath was a struggle, every movement a pain. After weeks of hellish conditions, the surviving migrants were rounded up once more and taken to the coast. Here, they were herded onto small, overcrowded boats, nothing more than inflatable dinghies that barely held together. Amoah looked at the boat he was about to board, a sinking feeling in his gut. It was barely seaworthy, already taking on water as they clambered aboard. But there was no choice. Europe was just across the sea, the final barrier between him and the life he had dreamed of. As they set off into the Mediterranean, the reality of their situation became clear. The sea was rough, the waves high, and the dinghy creaked and groaned with every swell. The smugglers, who had once promised safety, were nowhere to be seen. They had handed the migrants over to the sea and left them to their fate. The crossing was a nightmare. The boat, designed for no more than 20 people, was packed with over 50. The engines sputtered and died several times, leaving them at the mercy of the waves. Water began to seep in, and soon, the migrants were bailing out water with their hands, using whatever they could find to keep the boat afloat. Panic set in as the boat started to capsize, and in the chaos, people began to fall overboard, disappearing beneath the waves. Amoah clung to the side of the boat, his knuckles white, his heart pounding with fear. The screams of the drowning filled the air, and the cold of the sea seeped into his bones. Just when he thought all hope was lost, the lights of a rescue ship appeared on the horizon. The ship's crew pulled the survivors from the water, their bodies limp and nearly lifeless. The rescue ship brought them to Italy, but the welcome was far from warm. Amoah and the others were taken to a refugee center, where they were given food, water, and medical attention. But there was no guarantee of a future in Europe. The Italian government was under pressure to stem the flow of migrants, and after weeks of uncertainty, Amoah was told that his asylum application had been rejected. he would be deported back to Ghana. The journey back was a blur. The dream that had driven Amoah across the Sahara, through the hell of Libya, and across the Mediterranean had turned to ash. When Amoah's plane touched down in Accra, the sound of the wheels meeting the tarmac jolted him from his stupor. The journey had taken everything from him: his money, his health, and most devastating of all, his spirit. As he disembarked and walked through the bustling airport, the familiar heat of Ghana's sun felt different, more oppressive. The land he had once called home now seemed foreign to him, as if he no longer belonged. The drive back to Goaso was silent and somber. The once vibrant landscape of Ghana blurred past the windows, but Amoah's thoughts were far away. He was haunted by memories of the desert's cruel whispers, the brutality of the Libyan camps, and the cold, dark waters of the Mediterranean. Every bump in the road seemed to echo the struggles he had endured, each mile bringing him closer to a life he no longer knew how to live. When he finally arrived in Goaso, the town was unchanged. The cocoa trees still swayed gently in the breeze, and the people still went about their daily routines. But to Amoah, everything felt different. He was no longer the man who had left, full of hope and ambition. The villagers, who had once looked up to him, now stared with a mixture of pity and curiosity. They had heard rumors of what had happened, but no one truly knew the horrors Amoah had faced. His wife met him at the edge of town. Her eyes were filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. She had prayed for his return every night, but the man who stood before her now was a shadow of the one she had said goodbye to. She embraced him tightly, but Amoah felt distant, detached. The journey had left scars too deep to heal with a simple homecoming. As days turned into weeks, Amoah tried to reintegrate into life in Goaso, but it was as if he were living in a dream, one from which he could not wake. He took up work as a laborer on the very farms he had once owned, his body performing the motions of tilling, planting, and harvesting, but his mind remained elsewhere. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the desert, or in the warehouse in Sabah, or struggling to stay afloat in the Mediterranean's unforgiving waters. The nights were the worst. The silence of the village contrasted sharply with the noise that filled his mind: the howling of the wind during the sandstorm, the cries of those left behind, the gunshots in the Libyan camps. Sleep brought no rest, only vivid nightmares that left him gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. He would often find himself awake long before dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever feel whole again. His wife tried to reach him, but there was a distance between them now, one that could not be bridged by words or touch. Amoah had lost more than his possessions on his journey. He had lost a part of himself, a part that he feared he would never recover. He could see the concern in her eyes, the way she watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. But he didn't know how to explain to her the depths of his despair. Years passed, and the whispers of the desert grew quieter, though they never truly disappeared. Amoah aged, the lines on his face deepening, each one a testament to the life he had lived. He never forgot the journey, but he no longer let it define him. Instead, he used it as a lesson, a story to guide others, to help them see that the life they had here in Goaso was worth more than the uncertain promises of far-off lands. In the evenings, when the sun began to set and the shadows grew long, Amoah would often stand at the edge of his fields, watching as the day faded into night. The land, once a symbol of confinement, had become a place of peace. And though the desert had taken much from him, it had also given him something, an appreciation for the life he had, for the simple joys of home. Amoah's story became part of the fabric of Goaso, passed down from one generation to the next. It was a story of caution, of survival, and ultimately, of finding peace in the place where his journey had begun. The desert's whisper might still echo in his mind, but now it was no longer a voice of fear. It was a reminder of his strength, of the resilience that had carried him through the darkest times, and of the life he had rebuilt with his own hands. And so, Amoah lived out his days in Goaso, not as the man who had been broken by his journey, but as the man who had learned to find value in what he had once taken for granted. The desert was behind him, but its lessons would stay with him forever, a silent whisper in the wind, guiding him toward the peace he had sought for so long. Thank you for watching this gripping tale of survival and reflection. If you found Amoah's story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales to Shine for more stories that illuminate the human experience. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. Until next time, keep shining bright with Tales to Shine.